Wanna know what's silly? Star Wars. Wanna know what's even sillier? Well, I mean, give me a break. Fair enough.
But jokes aside, it's Star Wars fans. Especially the ones who fall for YouTube tabloid BS about Star Wars all the damn time. And of course those who are still not over the fact that the old extended universe of books, video games and other media has been wiped from canon when Disney bought the IP. And you know what? That one I get. I get it. I got it then, I get it now. Not the tabloid rage crowd, mind you. But the people who preferred the old stories, fair enough. Having read a number of those books and played a number of these games, there's a lot to love there. And of course there's also a lot of silly stuff, but as I already mentioned, Star Wars itself is and always has been rather silly, so it kind of fits. What I liked most about the old EU, now called Legends, is that these weren't just the origin stories of side characters or connective tissue between movies, no. These books very much told original stories and built a whole world of their own. Meanwhile, outside of the movies and shows, most of which I very much liked for that matter, the new canon doesn't have much to offer in that regard yet. But now it seems it's the book's turn at long last. Recently the High Republic was launched, an all-new publishing series of books and comics, and its very first book, Charles Soule's Light of the Jedi, was not only one hell of a read that hyped me up for what comes next, no, it also made me want to go back and fill some gaps in my Legends knowledge, while I'm rediscovering my love for reading tales from the galaxy far, far away. Yeah, unfortunately my first pick was the Dark Empire trilogy, which I ended up liking even less than the time Papa Palpatine returned to the movies, which is quite a feat considering I have little love for that one either. From there I quickly moved on to what should have been my go-to choice. Enter the Hand of Thrawn duology, Spect of the Past and Visions of the Future. Having grown up with the prequels, I found myself eager to get my hands on something else Star Wars related after Revenge of the Sith. And in 2008 the opportunity presented itself in the form of Star Wars The Clone Wars, the movie, which I did not like that much at all. Without internet or many television channels, I also wasn't able to follow the subsequent TV show, and whenever I did see an episode of those early 3 seasons I didn't end up liking them either. By the time they reintroduced my least favorite villain and threw some robot legs on him for good measure, I was completely done with all of this. This was not the Star Wars I was interested in, and while I, as I would later find out, missed out on the show actually getting kinda good and even great at times, I found something else much more up my alley. A book trilogy older than myself, telling us what came after Endor. Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy, Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command. And I love that shit. Even to this day it's one of my favorite Star Wars tales, up there with some of the movies themselves. Admiral Thrawn, the Solo Twins, Mara Jade and Talon Karrde quickly became some of my favorite Star Wars characters, sometimes even up there with the heroes from the movies themselves. Mara Jade especially felt like a natural addition to the core team of heroes, feeling at least as important and integral as Lando or Chewbacca, despite coming from the Imperial side of things. In many ways she was to the crew from the original trilogy what Ahsoka ended up being for the prequel heroes, in my mind at least. Okay, but why talk about the Thrawn trilogy right now, rather than the Hand of Thrawn duology this video is actually about? Well, because you should read the trilogy first, otherwise you will be completely lost. Alright, let's get into it. The former Captain Pellaeon and now Admiral of the remaining Imperial forces, who had served as a POV for the reader in the Thrawn trilogy, finds himself admitting that the New Republic has very much won the war at this point, and that the Empire is far from the threat it once had been. Seeking to end needless bloodshed, he plans to offer and sign a peace treaty with the New Republic. But not everyone on the Empire's side is in favor of that approach, and on top of that, reports suggest that Admiral Thrawn might be back. The man who single-handedly managed to outsmart the New Republic and deal devastating blow after devastating blow on the battlefield 10 years earlier, before his untimely demise when the one thing he failed to foresee cost him his life. On the opposing side of things, not everything is roses and sunshine either. A secret from the past comes to light that threatens to shatter the Republic's unity, and it leads to a great number of riots and entire systems out for both in blood. While the other half quite rightly points out that you can't punish an entire race for the actions of a few. Unfortunately, no one knows the identities of these individuals, and so our heroes try a number of different angles to uncover who those responsible were, while the clock is very much ticking. Between the two sides we already know all too well, the Empire and the Republic, pirates, smugglers, and lastly, a completely new mysterious faction appear in what turns out to be mostly Luke's and Mara's quest. But even here, Zahn enriches the story with two local factions that have their own agenda, because as ever, nothing is all that straightforward with him, and personally I'm here for it. As you can tell, there's a lot going on. So much actually that what had been meant to be a single book was split into two parts, as Timothy Zahn revealed on Facebook. Another thing he noted there, and undoubtedly in the past in some interviews, is that he had come back to write these books under two conditions. Number 1. Ending the war between the New Republic and the Empire. Number 2. Getting Luke and Mara together. The former was immediately granted, the second one not so much. And true to his word, he actually politely declined the offer at the time. Apparently desperate to get the star author back on board for this, Lucasfilm eventually relented. Suffice it to say, these two things were important to Zahn, thus it surprised me a little that the actual romance part of the story only takes up a small fraction of the book. Sure, there are some situations they put in that are anything but subtle, like when Mara has to catch Luke before he slams into a wall early on, but her lacking ability to understand the locals through the Force on Neron, I probably butchered that name, requires some forehead touching. Ooh, spicy. Or when they have to form an arc for an awkwardly long time to avoid a grim fate by falling into a devouring swarm of killer insects, which is probably the most badass reason for handholding I have ever seen. And I don't really mind that at all. I'm not an overly romantic person to begin with, and Star Wars has never really been good at that front anyway. It sometimes feels like for every couple I like in this universe, there are 2 or 3 I either can stand or feel very indifferent about. Luke and Mara I actually like together, and their trip through the caverns is a very deliberate callback to their travels through the forest in Heir to the Empire. Except this trip is much more concerned with reflecting on the past few years. Them growing closer together feels real, natural and even cute, but after a really cool force bonding moment to save their own and each other's skin, during an intense battle they immediately go for the marriage proposal, then the I love you and then the kiss, which isn't only very sudden, it also feels like it's in the wrong order, and like it should have happened over some months and years and not just a few minutes really. But okay, I guess Zahn wanted to make sure that neither Lucasfilm nor another author would show up and be like, they dated for 2 weeks and then they decided to see other people, or something like that. Still, while the fairy tale-esque conclusion to this story isn't as cathartic as I had hoped, I still liked the tale overall, and it was one of my favorite subplots in the entire duology. What surprised me more was that I was looking forward to each and every chapter that featured Admiral Pallion's point of view. I mean, I'd always liked him, but here Pallion was a real highlight. The man who had basically been the late Admiral Thrawn's loyal right-hand man was now reigning over an empire that has certain elements who eagerly await the perfect time to stab him in the back. Between uncovering a plot against himself and, more importantly, his plans, trying to contact the New Republic and numerous rumors that his former mentor has shown up again, now working with a rather slimy individual, his position is incredibly fascinating amidst an ever-moving plot, and you start really rooting for the man, well at least I did. When he eventually gets to meet Thrawn, it's just really intense, and while this isn't a spoiler-free review, I don't wanna spill those beans here. The aforementioned slimy individual, Moff Disra, and his team Flim and Tears are another highlight in these books. Their dynamics among one another and their schemes to restore the Empire's glory, while undermining the Republic and inciting riots within its borders, are fascinating, especially since none of these 3 could do any of this alone. They don't trust each other, but they need one another, since everyone brings a different skill to the table. Remove one and their whole carefully built house of cards crumbles immediately. Unfortunately, the Republic side of things is far less engaging. I'm not saying entire systems throwing a stupid fit is unrealistic, but I am saying it is not exactly fun to read, with one side in the conflict just feeling too dumb, but hey, who am I to judge? Badum. Leia and Han make it mostly worthwhile. Their voices seem very on point and they take actions that are very in character and also for the most part rather entertaining. But stuff like Wedge's and Corran Horn's undercover work on the Boffin's home planet, and their struggle with an only slightly more interesting Imperial undercover force, aren't exactly must-read subplots, and the same goes for most everything related to General Bel Iblis and the Smuggler Booster. Much like the other thing Timothy Zahn had set out to do, namely Mara's and Luke's relationship, the peace between the Republic and Empire comes fairly quickly in the end. Hell, we even skip the final battle. But I feel like it actually works in favor of this storyline since it mirrors the never-ending struggle the two sides have been engaged in for many years. And then it just ends. Talon Kart's subplot, meanwhile, which I haven't even mentioned yet, is kind of the opposite of that. For the most part, his and Shader's story feels very disconnected from the halfway point on, but in the end it lays the groundwork for the connection between the Imperials and the Republic later on. And the former smuggler now serves a much greater cause, which is really more of a payoff for Shader, a former assassin who aims to serve a greater cause than just money or power, which makes an odd partner for Card, who, even though he's been a good guy for a while now, is still a smuggler, and money is kinda their thing. Sadly, this sounds more interesting on paper than it turned out to be, and somewhat feels like another subplot that would have worked better as its very own book. In conclusion, I think Timothy Zahn maybe wanted to do too much at once, and while it is not unusual for him to have multiple plots brewing at the same time, not all of them felt all that necessary this time, nor did they all stick the landing as well as I had hoped. But that doesn't take anything away from the fact that I enjoyed these two books greatly, and thankfully there exists a Michael Stackpole comic called Star Wars Union that serves as a perfect epilogue and companion piece. Star Wars Union is really just the story of Skywalker and Jade's wedding. They plan for a small and intimate wedding, and naturally their wish doesn't come true in the slightest, since the union of a rebel hero and the former Emperor's hand not only gathers a lot of attention from both sides, it also said to happen shortly after the signing of the peace treaty and thus has huge symbolic value. Now, it would be a shame if such a symbolic event would end in a catastrophe, as some who disagree with the peace treaty see it as the perfect opportunity to make their anger known. But really, how bad can things get with so many Jedi and other heroes there? The answer is not much. An overall pretty light-hearted and even cute story comes to a surprisingly heartwarming conclusion in which the leader of the would-be assailants himself gets the opportunity to do the right thing and lay down his weapon, adding another symbolic gesture to what's already going on. A chance he only gets to make because Luke lets him decide rather than cutting him down where he stands. The comic rounds up the rough edges of the ending of Visions of the Future quite well, and for me at least enhances the experience as a whole. I give the Hand of Thrawn duology 8 out of 10 Y-Wings. 8.5 if we include Union. And that's it, we're done. So usually that's the part where the YouTube dude, in this case me, would ask you to like, share, subscribe, support me on Patreon or on my Discord or whatever, and I have none of those things and I have no plans for a second video, at least right now. So I just wanted to do this for the funsies. So what I'm saying is, goodbye, and may the Force be with you.